women particularly, and men, like what gets in the way of their career progression is that they don't understand the impact that your financial status has on your ability to progress in your career. And for women, it's really acute because we don't often realize that for most women, they are either the primary breadwinner in their household or a significant contributor. So if their money is at risk, they will not take a risk to move their career. So the first thing I ask women to do is ask yourself, are your behaviors related to your finances getting in the way of your career? Are you fully participating in your savings for your future? Do you have an adequate backup plan or emergency fund? Do you understand the finances in your household? Do you have a good relationship with money? Those sorts of things. And if you don't, what can you do about it?
Yeah. Welcome back to this episode of Secrets of the Career Game. So many people are trying to navigate a corporate world that is laden with secrets, cleverly hidden, and unspoken rules to a game that most employees don't even know that they're playing. On this podcast, we try to give you a peek behind the curtains and some tips and tricks to ultimately make you successful in your career and help you progress a little bit faster. Hello. We have a fabulous guest with us here today. We have Dr. Candace Steele Flippin joining us. She has founded the Global Career Advancement Institute, which is a career empowerment and research center aimed towards really helping individuals take charge of their careers and provide organizations with practical, evidence-based strategies to develop effective leaders. And if you followed me for any amount of time, you know that I love practical evidence-based advice. So we're so excited to have you on the podcast, Dr. Candace. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you, Kendall. I'm really excited to be here.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey, right? You've become this best-selling author of Generation Z in the workplace, millennials in the workplace. You've created the SHAPE Career Accelerator program. Like, how did your career journey evolve that ultimately led to where you are now?
Yes, serendipity and paying attention. Some people call that intentionality. I didn't have a straight line in my career. I actually started out working in museums. I was an art history major, and if anyone out there has a degree in the humanities or studying the humanities, and everyone says, what are you going to do with that degree? I say it's the best degree because it teaches you critical thinking and you can do anything you want with it. But in my case, I was freshly out of college. I was living my dream, working 2 jobs. I think my first job paid like maybe $16,000 a year. And then I had 2 part-time jobs. But then things changed in the state I was living in. I grew up in Michigan, and museums lost their funding. And it was part of like a world, not worldwide, but U.S. centric thing. It was around changing and social programs. And so here I am. And the museum executive director came to me and she said, Candace, don't worry. We've found a way to save your job. And I'm thinking, great, that's good. And she said, here's what we want you to do. We want you to run the camp-in program. And the camp-in program means that young people come to the museum, they spend overnight, they have this camp-in experience, and they go home and you get to spend the night on a cot with a bunch of kids, giving them all these great experiences. And I thought that was fun. But then she said, and you only have to do it, I think like 26 weekends out of a year. Now, I don't know about you, and I'm sure no one else feels this way, but this is how I felt at 23, knowing that I would have to spend half the year sleeping on a cot on the weekends. I just saw my social life like unfolding, exploding. And so I went to her and I said, well, maybe I could do more. And she says, yes, and we're going to give you this other job. And to kind of whittle this story down for the serendipity part, I said, well, what's my new raise? I'm now doing 2 jobs and spending the weekend here for half the year. Guess what she said, how much more I was going to make an hour? 25 cents.
Love it. Solid raise.
And so I started looking for something else. And that took me to healthcare. And around that same time, I had a conversation with the woman who gave me the first tidbit of advice that I'd like to share with your audience. I asked her, how did you plan your career? And she said, I really didn't plan it. I just stayed open to opportunity. So the first thing I'd like to share is please stay open to opportunity, because that opportunity then took me to get my MBA and took me to working in communications, took me to 30 different countries around the world, working at for five different types of industries, to starting my own business. And so I share that story to say that what I thought at 23 was something that was going to change my social life forever actually led me to a piece of advice that kept me open into lots of different industries.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I've heard that similarly before. A woman I worked with at JP Morgan Chase, that used to be the big cornerstone of her speech, was like, I had this accidental career. And I think it's interesting because as someone who also had a very non-linear career progression, there is that element of you have to stay open, you have to be willing to take on new opportunities, try new things. But I'd love to hear your take to be slightly contrarian. I often advocate on this podcast that I want people to be open to opportunities, but intentional with what they're good at. And I would argue that in your position, yes, you were open to new roles, but did you feel like you knew what you were good at and the value that you brought to those organizations as you stepped into each new opportunity? Or did you feel like, I'm just flying by the seat of my pants and we'll see what the next role is? I'd love to hear kind of what that transition felt like for you.
Yeah, so I said it was serendipity and intentionality. So
Mm-hmm.
the intentionality part came from asking good questions. And one of the key questions that I asked early in my career was, I was speaking to a recruiter, and I said, based on what you've seen across all career stages, what advice would you give me at the beginning of my career? And he said, there are two ways that you can make money and have a successful career in your domain. And my domain was corporate communications, corporate marketing. You can stay at one company a long time, or you can find out what you're really good at and keep doing it over and over and over again. And so I learned that I was very good at managing change and issues and seeing what was coming and rebranding and helping to tell a story. And so I decided to focus on companies that were going through change, mergers and acquisitions, help them tell their story to their customers, to their investors, to their employees, repackage themselves, go through whatever that transaction was, and then keep doing it over and over and over again. But what I would say from a career standpoint, I didn't go to school to learn that. It actually was planted because my family moved around a lot, and I was always the new girl, and I always had to figure like how to start over. And so my siblings, we just were not averse to change. And so when I thought about, well, what changes in business and in communications and marketing, it's the new strategy, the program, the new company. And so I leaned into that, and that worked for me.
I love that. It's, something that you said, Dr. Candace, that I think is so important for listeners is this balance of serendipity, open to new opportunities, this intentionality of knowing what you're good at and leaning into that space. Oftentimes, I think we hear one or the other. We hear like, oh, you need to be really strategic, or we hear like, just go with the flow, be open. And I 1000% agree with you. I think it is that intersection of, hey, I'm willing to do all the new things, but I also know what I want, what I like, what I'm good at, and how I can best help you. Otherwise, we end up stepping into new opportunities that we're not going to love, which sets us back probably. And the second thing that you mentioned that I hone in on is I feel such a kindred spirit to you. I grew up moving a lot. We moved almost 20 times before I graduated high school. We're constantly in new places, constantly the new kid. And what is it that I'm really good at work? I'm really good at change. You want to innovate, do something new, roll out a new strategy, build a new team. I'm your girl. You want me to take over something BAU that already exists and do it the same way you've done it 20 years. I am not your gal. Like that to me is career death. And so I love that idea of like what has shaped you and how it creates these skills that we can then apply to our careers. And, you kind of mentioned the SHAPE framework that you've built. Why don't you tell our listeners who may not be familiar with you a little bit more about what that framework is and how that applies to people in, the modern working conditions?
So, Kendall, I'm a practical researcher. So, along my journey as an executive, I met so many amazing women, just fantastic, who were reaching to climb the ladder. And as the lean organizations and others talk about, they fell off. They call it the broken rung.
Mm-hmm.
And I started just asking questions because the other thing I'm good at is being curious. The kid who's always asking questions, that was me. And so um, I asked these 3 questions, and that led me to SHAPE. The first is, do you have the career you need? I did a study about this, 600 men and women in the US. Do you have the career you need? Does your career offer you the money, the time to take care of you and your family? And it turns out that 63% of women don't, compared to 37% of men. So then I asked, well, do you have the career that you want? Does it match your passion and your purpose? Is it what you trained in, what you went to school for? Is it something you actually want to do? Do you have the career that you want? 58% of women said, no, I don't have the career I want, versus, and I have my notes here to make sure I get these stats right, versus 42% of men. And then I asked, do you have the career you deserve? Does your career give you the compensation, the access, the respect based on what you've done and contributed because you've actually earned it? So when I asked women, do you have the career you deserve? Does your career give you the compensation, the access, the respect based on what you've contributed and that you've earned? 62% of women said no, versus only 38% of men.
That's wild.
Right. And if my mom were here, she would say, Candy, you don't always get what you want. So life is not fair, right? So, but you know what? I broke through. And if you read my book, I didn't have a story, easy yellow brick road type path. So I started looking at, well, what does it take to get through? What does it take to get through? And I wish, Kendall, I had a magic wand and I could say, or Oprah gift, like, you get what you need, you get what. There's nothing I can do right now that's going to get rid of any kind of isms. It's not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
I have a doctorate in management, not miracle work. And so I started looking at self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is basically, if you believe, it's your ability to believe that you can influence and change an outcome if you do something about it. Scientifically, it's like, your intrinsic ability to know that if you start a task, it's going to work out for you. But I just shorten it to say, if you bet on yourself, will you win? And it turns out that you can dial up your self-efficacy. And I proved it now with over 7 studies that there are things women can do to dial it up. And let me just put a pin in self-efficacy, Kendall, so your listeners know what that means. Have you ever, so think back in your life, wanted to do something, doesn't matter what it is, and you told someone, you said, oh, Dr. Candace, I want to bake a cake. I want to get this promotion. And you're all excited. And I say, I don't think so. You? Remember that pie you made, or that time that, whatever, but you go do it anyway. Have you ever had people, haters, naysayers, doubters, who when you told your hopes and dreams and aspirations to, they said you couldn't do it and you did it anyway?
For me personally, absolutely. And it's funny you say that, because I think of there's a trend on social media right now where people are saying you've lost personality privilege. Like, I told you something I wanted to do. I told you my hopes and dreams, and you told me I was being too much. I was too loud. I was too excited. I was too X. And so, like, now you've lost the privilege of my personality. And like, but yes, I am that person that you tell me I can't. I'm like, I can't what? We'll go do it now for sure.
And you should. And that's an example of your self-efficacy being dialed up. There's something inside of you that lets you know that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's not confidence. Confidence is your belief in yourself. Self-efficacy is your belief that if you do something, it's going to work out. Like I say, confidence may open the door for you, but it's your level of self-efficacy that allows you to walk through it. So that's an example of your self-efficacy being high. Now, have you ever had a conversation with someone? Maybe there's a job opportunity and you come to that person and say, Candace, you've been so great doing X, Y, and Z. I think you should apply for the director, vice president, executive director, CEO of X. And you share the job description with me. And I say, gosh, thank you, Kendall. I could do it, but it says it needs 5 years of experience, and I only have 4 years, 362 days. Oh, so close. Or, gosh, I just became X. I can't do Y right now. I need more time. I need more. That is an example of my self-efficacy holding me back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we see that all the time, especially in women when I work with them who are looking for new jobs. I see that all the time of like, oh, I can't apply for this job. I don't meet all the criteria. Whereas traditionally in men, we see less of that where they're like, I could probably do that, right? And that there's a lot of contributing factors to wage gap and career progression speed and things like that. But I believe that one of them majorly comes down to what you're bringing up, which is, am I willing to bet on myself in this situation? And I actually have an employee who works for me who we went to promote 2 years ago. And he was like, Kendall, I can't do that. And I was like, you can, and you will, and you're in that role. You're going to figure it out. It's going to be great. But most people don't have a manager who's willing to do that for them. And so what happens is you get stuck in your own self disbelief and lack of self efficacy, and you can't progress. So I love this. Yes, these are great examples.
So let's have fun with science. So I did these studies to see what are things that people can do to dial up their career self-efficacy, their belief that they can influence it, right? Because you have to try. And it turns out there are 5 things. And so I gave them nice little names, but I'm going to walk you through them. So the first I call SAVE. And in my studies around women, particularly, and men, like what gets in the way of their career progression is that they don't understand the impact that your financial status has on your ability to progress in your career. And for women, it's really acute because we don't often realize that for most women, they are either the primary breadwinner in their household or a significant contributor. So if their money is at risk, they will not take a risk to move their career. So the first thing I ask women to do is ask yourself, are your behaviors related to your finances getting in the way of your career? Are you fully participating in your savings for your future? Do you have an adequate backup plan or emergency fund? Do you understand the finances in your household? Do you have a good relationship with money? Those sorts of things. And if you don't, what can you do about it?
Yeah, there's so much of financial hesitancy when it comes to career assertiveness, right? Which is what I think you're going towards. And I think back when I first graduated college, I studied mathematics, about as far from art history as you can possibly get, but very heavy on critical thinking. And I was offered a job with everybody else who's ever graduated college at like a life insurance company. And they gave me this aptitude test and they said, you scored perfectly for everything that we look for in an employee except for risk. I've never seen such a low score for risk aptitude. And I was like, yeah, no, financial stability is super duper important to me. And I chose a different job that had a much lower salary, much lower earning potential, but was very stable at that junction in my career for that exact reason. And so I definitely think there is this connection between financial stability, financial security, and what you're willing to do for your career. And this is especially true if you decide to pursue entrepreneurship or starting your own company or, advocating for a more sales oriented position that has a higher risk downside. So I love that you start with that financial literacy piece because it does weave in so closely with what we do in our careers.
Yeah. And know your numbers. What's your short-term number? Like, what do you need for 3 to 6 months? What's your midterm number? 18 to 24 months, because it could take longer depending on where you are in your career. And then what's your retirement number? So many people are getting caught surprised in their 50s without a plan. So that's the first one. The second one, I call it hard work. And it's not that I'm suggesting that you don't work hard. Here's what I found in the research. There's a misalignment, and people don't understand that hard work is actually subjective.
Yes.
Just
If
like
you're not watching
beauty.
this, I'm snapping. If you're watching and you're listening, there are snaps happening.
Just like beauty is in the eye of the beholder, hard work is determined by those who are evaluating you or influencing the person who evaluates you. And I have had so many conversations with individuals as I research all three of my books. And here's what it comes down to. I don't understand why I didn't get that promotion.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about it in one of your other episodes about influence, but like, people don't understand that you have to be aligned with what the person evaluates you thinks is good and hard work, and aligned to what your company. And what I find too often is that we keep our heads down thinking someone's going to notice, or we think it's Y, but actually your boss wants X. We overwork,
Mm-hmm.
we double down on, tactical work and those sorts of things, not thinking about the soft skills. I know you've talked about that. And so I always say it's really important to know that, hard work is subjective, and you need to be aligned with the person who calls the shot on that. And as painful as it can be, that's just the way it is.
Yeah. And, I equate isolated hard work to a tree falling in the forest and nobody's around to hear it, right? If your boss doesn't know you're working hard and your boss doesn't value the work that you're doing and your boss doesn't understand the impact that you're having, you can work hard all day long and it's not going to get you promoted. You have to have visibility. You have to have a person in the forest to watch it happen for you to get that credit. So I love this idea of it being subjective, because what I could see as hard work as an individual contributor may be very different than what my leadership is looking for. Or to the contrary, I'm looking at Steve. Steve is always my problem employee. I apologize if all of Steve's listening, but Steve does nothing but goes to the happy hours. He advocates for himself well. He knows how to articulate the value of his work. So he may only work 10 hours a week, but he's getting promoted. Whereas I'm working 80-hour weeks, but I get nothing because that subjective opinion of which of us is more valuable is skewed in his favor. So I definitely agree with that 1,000%. You're right. I've talked about it on a million episodes, so we don't need to go too deep here, but I love that you're bringing in that subjective opinion to it, because unfortunately that is the way it works.
You have to have the conversation. And not all managers, depending on what generation they are, appreciate the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to have the conversation. You have to get aligned and know and get that agreement, because it also could backfire. You think you're like giving it all, and they think that maybe you're not efficient in how you use your time.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I see that all the time. I tell people, if you come to me and you tell me that you're working more than 50 hours a week, I'm going to tell you that you are bad at your job. Not good. And most people take that really harshly. They're like, but I work so hard. I'm like, well, you're clearly not working on the right things if it's taking you 50 hours a week, right? Because we're wasting time spending somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And there are exceptions to every rule, but on the whole, very rarely do I tell a client who's working overtime that they're working on the right priorities. So yes, there's 1,000% there.
Yeah. Even if you enjoy it, because sometimes if you have a type A personality, like I enjoy the work. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's 2 a.m. Where did the time go?
Yeah.
The third one I call advocate, and it's really about using your voice effectively. And it's about how do you negotiate for the things that you need, you want, and you deserve, right? So it's that understanding negotiation. Sometimes we're shy about negotiating for time and resources. We ask, we don't negotiate. And that could set you back anywhere from $500,000 to $2 million of lifetime earning and wealth.
Mm-hmm.
Also, if you don't know how to use your voice effectively, you could fall victim to what I call being taken advantage of by a, kind of like a idea vampire.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but let's just say you go into the meeting, Kendall, and The topic is arithmetic, and you say, okay, well, I believe that 1 + 1 = 2. No one says anything. But then let's go to Steve. Steve says, hey, if I have one thing and two things, and I bring it together, it's 2. Oh my God, gold, Steve, gold. And you're just sitting there like, what I just said. So knowing strategies to what Steve, maybe you talked about it him at lunch, but before the meeting, he was getting allies around the room.
Mm-hmm.
He co-signs others, so people want to give him that grace.
Yeah.
And so knowing how to use your voice effectively, and from the science part of it, it is the most highly correlated factor to career success.
Yeah, it's something that we talk about a lot, is that self-advocacy, that, communication of your self-worth. And I love that there's two things kind of hidden in what you just talked about that I want to call it explicitly for listeners. The first is that advocacy can be asking for what you need, right? And that could be resources, that could be time, that could be advocates in a room before a meeting takes place. I always tell people, like, my answer to my boss is always yes. You want the moon? Yes, I can get it for you. How much time, money, and people do I have? Right? Because that's going to determine when you get the moon and the quality at which the moon is received. You might be getting moon rocks if we've got a real small budget. But I can get it for you, but I need things in exchange. And advocacy for promotions, for raises, for finances. I tell people all the time, mistake I see is people go to their boss, they say, I deserve a raise because I did XYZ. And your boss is thinking, yeah, but I paid you to do XYZ.
Right.
You're not getting a raise for doing your job. Sorry.
Right.
So how do we negotiate for raises? How do we have that voice? How do we stand up for it so that we don't end up backseat to Steve in every meeting, watching him getting promoted, watching him getting raises when it could have been us, but we didn't know how to use our voice effectively. So I absolutely love that.
The flip side of that is using your voice. So if you're a person where this has ever happened to you, you're in the same meeting and people are talking about arithmetic and you're thinking, gosh, I read this Wall Street Journal article and it said that 1 + 1 = 2, but you don't say anything. You know it.
Mm-hmm.
Then you maybe looked at the Financial Times and maybe Cosmo or Essence, like it's all glaring there, but you don't say it. You don't use your words. But then Steve, maybe, he says it and you're thinking, gosh, I should have said that. Say it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
If you know you're right, use your voice, practice it. Practice using your voice and don't say, this may sound stupid or I might not be right.
Mm-hmm.
Just say it. Practice using your voice when you know that you're right.
Yes.
And then over time, you'll get used to using it when you think you're right. And if you need a lead in, you can say, have we considered? I've read whatever credible source. I want to share another point of view, but use your voice anyway.
Yep. Absolutely. It's one of the hardest things, I think, especially, I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, but like for introverts in the workplace, as I hear a lot, especially with virtual work, like, well, I don't want to interrupt, or they're already talking and I don't want to interject. But not saying anything looks worse than offering a contrary opinion, or than offering a corroborating opinion, or than speaking up and adding details that support an argument. Like, if you are not able to share your voice in those settings, people forget you're there. And I see so many, videos making fun of it on TikTok. You don't want to be the person that at the end of the meeting goes, thanks everybody. And then more than that, right? Your voice needs to be more than a like, thanks everybody for contributing. And something that I'm seeing, just to add one more thing, and then I want to get to your fourth point, is even if using Teams or whatever your equivalent instant messenger is, if you don't feel comfortable in a setting speaking up, practice using Teams to communicate with people at the same time, right? This is something I see often is I may be on a meeting where somebody's having a really heated argument and even I don't want to get involved. I'm going to ping my boss and say, hey, based on this topic, here's the article that we have that supports it. It seems like, I would align with so-and-so's opinion, but wanted you to have this extra data. Make sure your voice is heard in some fashion, even if that's not verbally. It is okay. I have an employee who Teamses me all the times in meetings, like, hey, here's my perspective on this. And that's great because at least I know they're engaged, they're listening, they're active, they're participating. And that can be a great foot in the door. Also, if verbally is still something that's holding you back, is use the tools at your disposal to make sure that your opinion is heard.
Absolutely. So let's move to 4. I call it persevere, but it's about having good coping skills. And the way that so having good coping skills helps you build your self-efficacy, because then it reinforces that when we have those inevitable valleys, you know it's short term and you can try to work your way through it, or you've amassed, your board of directors, your support system to help you move through, and you're making healthy choices. And then on the other side of that, you know when it's time to leave. So let's break both of those down. When we're under stress, there's fight or flight. Some people hunker down, right? And so if you're one of those who kind of hunkers down and you can't let yourself be vulnerable because maybe you're the superstar who everyone comes to. So you go to, let's say, Kendall, I'm having a really rough time. Not you, Candace. You're the one who does blah blah. Oh, you'll be fine. It's just short lived. And then you start telling me about your issues, and I'm being there for you. Or maybe you're the first or the only in your peer set or your family or your group, and so there's this enormous pressure that you're carrying, or you don't want to stress anyone out, right? So you carry that. And then over time, you can operate and function at your best. And then you start to doubt, maybe I shouldn't have taken this promotion. Maybe I'm not ready for a promotion. Maybe I can't handle it. Maybe it won't work out. Maybe I shouldn't have started my own business. All the things. And then it diminishes your ability to think that you can win or bet on yourself to do something different. Then on the other side, if you stay in a bad, toxic situation too long, it starts to eat away at you. And then before you know it, you said, well, this is all I've done. I've been here 5 years. You add the numbers up. This is all I know. So now you really won't bet on yourself, because even though you hate this, it's the devil you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really important to have a good support system. And if you're someone who says, well, I don't like networking, I don't like, I'm an introvert, I hate people, whatever the case may be, then hire a coach or join a group. You can do it online, but have some kind of forum where you can get that out to help you navigate, because the best leaders fail and learn and keep going. History is replete with them. So the expectation is not that you won't fall down. The expectation is that you have good systems in place so that you can get back up.
Yeah, I love that. And the first thing that you mentioned of when you're the only person in your support group, I recently read an article, I think it was US World and News Today, I'd have to double check, but they were talking about how there's less empathy for the high achiever.
Oh, yes, that's been around for a while.
And I loved that. That was like, the higher performing you are on average, the less empathy people around you have for your situation, because exactly what you alluded to, they think, well, you'll be fine. You'll figure it out. You'll work through it. You won't burn out. Or if you do burn out, you'll recover quickly. And so there is no empathy when you're the high achiever. There is no empathy when you're the trailblazer. There is no empathy when you're the strong one. And what does that mean for all the strong ones out there who are not strong all the time, right? You still need that support group. I love that you called it a board of directors, because that's what I call my husband. He is my board of directors, where I'm like, all right, board, what bad decisions am I making right now that we need to correct? And you have to have those methods to push through, because I think a common misconception, I say all the time, we have tunnel vision, right? We get, this is what I'm doing. This is what's important to me. This is where I'm at. And we forget that Candace could also be struggling. Candace could also be having issues, but we don't see it that way because Candace seems so elevated compared to our issues, or seems so above it all. And we have to be able to look side to side and say, okay, we're all human. We all have these same struggles, and you need that group of support, or you're gonna fail. And the second thing of knowing when to get out, I tell people all the time to set a timeline when you take a job. Don't wait till you're unhappy and then set a timeline. Too late. When you take that job, know how long you plan to be in that role at that level. right? Maybe it's 3 years, maybe it's 5 years. Do some temp checks, right? Every once in a while, somebody will come to me and be like, I only want to be in this role 12 months and I want to get promoted. I'm like, okay, well, you're a senior director going for VP. It's probably going to take longer, but set some reasonable expectations so that when you hit that timeline, you know it's time to make a change and you don't blame it on, well, this is the devil I know, or this is the situation I'm comfortable in, or maybe it's just going to take 6 more months. Like set that expectation with yourself up front. To protect yourself later from staying in something too long. I've stayed in something too long. I'm sure you've probably stayed in something too long. And you look back and you're like, man, I lost 2 years that I could have had somewhere else, or I lost 18 months that I could have been doing something different. It's definitely true that we have to persevere to a point, and we have to know where that point is also so that we don't get stuck.
I want to double click on the study. There's also, I'm not sure if this was in the same one you read, but there's also the study about if you go to people who've had adversity, they're the least empathetic. So if you say, I'm going to go to this person and you don't get that empathy, it's because people who've overcome a lot see that things you can overcome.
Yep. And they're like, just do it.
Right.
Be better. Yep.
Right. So just know that sometimes if you feel that I can't find someone who's done exactly this, it's okay, because most likely, based on that research, they might be the least empathetic person for you. So it's okay if you don't know someone who has had your exact same challenge. And then I want to round it out with the last one. I call it educate, which has two points. It's about self-awareness. Like, what do you know about yourself to be true? Can you have a growth mindset and do something about it? So the first is just getting an honest assessment of who you are and what you bring to the table. Like earlier I said, oh, because of this background, I can do this. But it's around either taking some kind of assessment, MBTI, EQI, whichever one, Strengths Finders, Hogan, whatever. Even just asking people you trust, what am I good at? What do I need to improve? So that you can get that self-awareness and do something about it, because we all have blind spots. And sometimes we have strengths that we overuse, which could have negative impacts. And then the other part of it is having a growth mindset. Like, don't be limited by just thinking everything you know today is all you'll ever know. You can't learn something new, even if you don't like it. And what happens in your brain when you do that is, so when new information comes, your brain can say, oh, wait a minute, is this danger? But if you're always learning something new, it doesn't matter what it is, when something new is presented, you can lean in with curiosity instead of a fixed mindset. And it's also correlated positively with your career self-efficacy. I tell people, really be open to learning things about yourself. That's constructive.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're presented with something and your first reaction is one of negativity, stop and say, well, how hard could this be? Lean in with curiosity. How could I learn this? Should I learn this? How could this work out for me? And then asking people who you trust, who will give you constructive feedback about your strengths and areas that you can improve in.
Yeah, I always say if you are no longer learning, you're failing, right? The second you stop wanting to learn stuff, you are on your downward slope. And it's interesting, there was a study in The New Extraordinary Leader by John Ziegler, where he talks about how in your 40s, men's interest in learning new things steep decline. So we go from learning a lot of things in our 20s and 30s, and then men hit their 40s and they're like, okay, I'm done. I've learned enough. Whereas women have the opposite effect. We are very hesitant to learn new things in our 20s and 30s, but in our 40s, we have a much higher interest in digesting new information, in learning things. And there could be a million causally related data points to that. But I always found it very interesting because I think as I get older, I want to learn new things more. And I see the coworkers and the peers that I have where that decline happens. I'm no longer interested in self-improvement. I'm no longer interested in learning new technology. I'm no longer interested in learning new ways to manage people, right? I think the work from home shift that happened in 2020 is being reversed a lot now by managers who didn't want to learn how to manage people effectively in a remote environment because it was hard and it was different and it's not the way they do things. I love that because it is that leaning in with unbiased, true self-awareness. right? There are all kinds of things that I do poorly that I need to work on. There are all kinds of areas where I can invest in myself to get better. And seeing them from a non-emotional standpoint of this is a positive area of investment for me, as opposed to tearing yourself down or being torn down by others or feeling like that's something I can't improve, is so important for how we evolve over time as people. So I love that you end with that, because we go through this whole journey of, understanding your financial literacy, learning to use your voice, learning how to persevere through obstacles, and then learning itself, right? And going through that whole journey, I think really rounds us out. So if someone is listening to this and they're like, okay, this very much resonated with me, I want to be better, I want to start applying some of these SHAPE principles, what's one thing that they could do tomorrow that you think would help them start to improve in these areas of their life?
So if I go by what scientifically helps the most, learn how to use your voice effectively.
Love that.
If I go by what I see happening now, is understand your financial situation and ask yourself, are my finances helping or hindering my success? And if I go by thousands of women I've spoken to, it's learn about what you know to be true about yourself that you can accept, because it's those blind spots that keep women back and keep Steve moving ahead.
Mm-hmm. I love those. These are so great. So Candace, if somebody was listening to this, and they're like, I love her, I want to learn more about her books, I want to work with her, where should people go?
They can look me up on LinkedIn at drcandacesteeleflippin.com. They can go to our company website, which is globalcai.com, a Global Career Advancement Institute. You can follow me on Instagram at CandaceSteeleFlippin.com. And I'm sure they can revisit this podcast because my information is there as well.
Yeah, we'll definitely make sure that we put all those links in the show notes. If you guys listened to this episode and you loved it as much as I did, just getting to participate, make sure you leave us 5 stars. Any questions for me or Dr. Candace, please put them in the comments below. Otherwise, thank you so much, Dr. Candace, for coming on the episode. We really loved having you.
Thank you, Kendall. It was fantastic.
And see.